Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO Podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. I'm very excited to have Lori Anello with me. Lori, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I love the fact that Larry Tritchie, who was in season 1, and also he did an RSA talk up on stage with Dee Dee, the three of us last year. So Larry introduced us, which is very lovely of him. So I appreciate that, and it's nice to. Obviously, we've spoken before, but it's very nice to talk to you now and find out a bit more about your career.
Absolutely. Thrilled for having me on here. It's great.
Good stuff. Well, I'm the lucky one here, so thank you very much. Let's start with what you're up to at the moment. It's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. So I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Fifth Third Bank, located here in Cincinnati, Ohio. I've been here going on 5 years, and I've been the CISO for just 2 years at this point.
Okay, great. Well, we want to get into that later on, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are probably the step below CISO that are maybe looking to achieve that. So we'll definitely be talking about that in a bit. Well, what were you doing before even getting into cyber? What was your foundation?
Yeah, I started off in IT many years ago. I actually started working when I was pretty young, 17. I'm from Maryland on the East Coast of the United States. And I worked basically in varying different roles, so we can talk about some of those as we go. But very much a Swiss Army knife, not completely cyber the whole time. When I started working in the 80s, cybersecurity wasn't a word even. Even information security wasn't a word, really. It was the first time we were getting mainframe worms happening on the internet and things like that. So very, very early days of that. So I had no idea at that point.
Wow, that's crazy. So you said 17, but it sounded like, I can't believe, I'm looking at you here. Surely you started when you were 8 or 9, you know.
Of course.
Yes. Good stuff. Well, look, so at 17, did you go straight into IT, or did you go to college? Tell me a little bit about what your background was.
Didn't really have a ton of funds to do that, where I came from. And didn't really, honestly, even have the grades to go straight into university at the time. So I got a job and I could type. And I landed, I think it was divine intervention, I landed in a computer center at the National Institutes of Health. It was my second choice job. The first choice tried to hire me, and they ended up going on a hiring freeze. So I took my second choice. And really, the rest is history. I worked there for, I'd say, a good straight year before I decided to try to go back to school, because I really had no idea what I would be good at or what I could do. But I could type wicked fast, so that's how I landed the job. But I ended up deciding to start going to school because I realized, hey, I'm not going to get very far without that. I'm talking to people there and asking them questions. So I went back and started a degree as a business marketing major. This is what I started to do at a community college. And then eventually found out that the U.S. government would pay for job-related classes if they were college classes. So anything writing, math, or computing, because I was at a computing facility, they would pay for. So I'm like, well, let's see what this computing stuff is all about. So I took a few classes. Got my grades up well enough to transfer to the University of Maryland. So now I could actually go to the school I really wanted to go to, still going at night, working full time, taking classes. And eventually my counselor asks to meet with me to check my progression. And she says, hey, what's your degree? I'm like, business marketing. She's like, I could have sworn you were computer science. I'm like, why is that? She goes, because the majority of your credits are computer science. So I'm like, well, if I change, will I lose any credit? Nope. So I switched my major and just basically full on went in to finish out as a computer and information science was the degree. So there began my admission that, okay, I really like this computing stuff, so maybe it's going to be a career.
Great. That's an amazing story, because I think we have a lot of people in our industry that have been very successful that didn't go straight to college. And certainly I think there's an element that the classic saying diamonds are made under pressure, right? But when you
That's right.
don't have the money to do things, and you can't just, you're not lucky enough to have parents that can just send you to whatever school, or you've got to work through it. You've got to figure out other ways of doing it. I actually never went to college. Nobody in my family had gone to college until some younger cousins of mine did. So again,
Right.
no funds to do it. There's some stuff I wish I'd studied now. Maybe if I have time, I'll get to go back. But I'm
Now you
probably
get to take
lucky.
whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I probably have a better idea of what I want now as well, because that's the interesting thing when people are making these decisions. I don't think that they're not out there working. They don't know enough about what they're doing yet, right? So
Absolutely. And because I was going at night, it was a pretty slow pace, right? Because you're not taking the same course load. I could make that shift and didn't lose a single credit in making that shift. And honestly, I think I definitely feel like I tell my children I live vicariously through them because they did get to go to school and live on campus and they got that privilege. Um, but looking back, I wouldn't change it because I got a lot of professional exposure from that. And that's why I'm a big advocate for people to do internships
mm,
if you can do that while you're in school, because you're trying on for size what you think you want to do. And in any profession, there's varying types of aspects of that profession. Not everything is exactly the same. So getting to try a couple different experiences will, one, tell you whether really that's the profession you want to do. And then two, within that profession, what do I actually want to do? What do I like to do? I got to figure that out while I was still in school and make adjustments. So by the time I graduated, I had the exact degree that I needed and was already working. And it accelerated my move to the next level where I was into what was in the government. In the federal government, there's a section called professional series where you
hmm
are now viewed as a professional and not just like an hourly entry level kind of person. And I got to get put into that series and move up very quickly after that because I had finished my degree, but had been doing it as I went along as well. So it really didn't stop me. I think I progressed nearly as fast as somebody who had gone to school the 4 years or gone and went and got their master's. And I never went back to get the master's because it took me so long to get the undergraduate. It took 9 years.
wow,
But
yeah.
I feel like I have a business degree just from experience, right?
Yeah. Well, 100% you do. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about internships, because that's something that there's just not enough of. I see somebody post an internship, 100 applicants, within a day or so. It's tough for people out there, and they really do need to get in and see what it's really like. Even I think like the value of an internship, even if it's, some people can't afford to take unpaid ones, right? So I get that, but if you can, just to see and sit in that environment and understand what they're really doing. I remember my old company prior to me starting Tyro, I worked for a big global recruitment company, and we hired two or three people that had gone all the way through, done their law degrees. One of them had even done their bar exam, and then when they started working within 6 months, hated it. Can you imagine
Oh,
spending that much money, that much time, and then realizing this isn't the job for me?
right. Yeah,
It's
go be a
bananas.
paralegal for a little while.
Yes, yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Well,
and
you
see what
still
you're
need
actually doing.
paralegals until AI takes over.
Yeah. I'm sure we'll get into AI a bit later. I think there's a lot. Well, yeah, I think maybe that'll take away some of the stuff that they didn't like doing, right? Maybe
Maybe.
that'll, yeah, who
We'll see.
knows? But yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head. So were you working in the government while you were doing your degree?
Yes. Yeah. It was
Okay.
10, I worked there for 10 years. So not the first year I didn't do anything, right? So that first year I wasn't in school. So the next 9 years I was in school. 10 years graduated, and I joke and say Uncle Sam helped me pay for that, and then I left as soon as I got the degree. But Uncle Sam got 10 years out of me. That's pretty darn good. And I kind of feel like government jobs should be temp jobs anyway. Go do some time as your civil servants, right, and then go off and do something else.
Yeah.
So by the time that happened, I realized I want to see what private industry, how it works, how business
hmm
works. So then I started, looking for something outside just to get different experience. I didn't just want to stay in one place, even though I felt like it was a noble place to work. I wanted just other experiences. So I did eventually after graduation, move to a private industry kind of job.
Yeah. What did you go into at that point?
So at that point, I was chasing my husband down, so I decided to change states as well. So I moved to Ohio, and I took consulting role. And boy, you learn a lot from a consulting role. Real small company, maybe 75 to 150 consultants total. We eventually got bought by a bigger company, but at the time we were pretty small. So you had to be super nimble and agile and just learn on the job. It was a super great place. Like people were really good, super moral people. However, just hard work, right? Like just drop you in the middle of a a job and be like, good luck, figure it out, right? So it definitely matures you very quickly and makes you begin to think on your feet. So I did that for almost 4 years.
Right.
And I
Wow.
would say the lion's share of that time I spent probably at Procter and Gamble the most of the time. So I went from government to a manufacturer.
Okay, that's a good stint in consulting firms. They're tough. It's often hard work. I don't know whether yours was, but most of the people I speak that are coming out because they're either traveling a lot or doing long
Right.
hours, having to be very available, which works for some people at some stages of their life, and then in other stages not so much.
That's for sure. It was the right stage to do that. And I got lucky. I moved around within that account quite a lot, but I got to stay within that account. There was probably only a couple of times where I got sent out to another account shortly, and then I'd end up back at that account. So that was in my hometown. Their home, their corporate headquarters was here in Cincinnati. So most of the time, unless they sent me on travel, sometimes they sent me on
All
travel,
right.
but it wasn't crazy like a lot of those jobs could have been. So it was tolerable for 4.5 years. Worked out.
That's good. I've been doing this panel for I've done it for 2 years, 3 years, sorry, and hopefully we'll be in again this year. But it was basically the first year. It was for people that were in their very first jobs in cybersecurity, their first sort of dedicated jobs in cybersecurity, and so they talked about how they got them, and then the next year we did an update, and it's become kind of one of the most popular talks. So at this point, hopefully, they said when we did last year's, it was very successful again. They asked us to do it again this year. So fingers crossed that will go through. But the interesting thing is, all four of them have worked in consulting at some point, and all four have seen huge benefits from working in the consulting realm early in their career. So.
Right.
I think that's good. I think if you can dedicate yourself and put yourself to it, it's a great opportunity and really sort of can propel you on.
Absolutely. Just the number of skills you're going to have to learn. Like I said, thinking on your feet, talking to people at varying different levels, because you have to not only talk to if you're an engineer, you're talking to the engineers, but sometimes you have to act like account manager too, and deal with your sponsor, your account person or whatever, just to talk through stuff if they're not happy about something, because you're the one on site, right? So you have to go up and down the chain quite a bit in those kinds of jobs too. So there's just a myriad of maturity skills, professional skills you learn from that, not just the obviously you're going to learn tech skills as well.
And were you doing at that point? You were doing dedicated IT or some cyber or some
At that
information
point,
security?
I kind of grew up in a mainframe shop in that NIH time. The PC became, and distributed computing really kicked off. Nobody even calls it that anymore, right? But it was called distributed computing
Yeah.
then. So I moved to the team that was in charge of figuring out what the heck the NIH was going to do with PCs. And they actually really glammed onto the Macintosh because they were doing a lot of biomedical type stuff with graphics. Like the Human Genome Project was still going on at that time. They were trying to map that out, so they needed those graphics. So they were a huge Macintosh shop. So I ended up eventually becoming like a consulting level person. I was first like a dispatcher, a help desk person, and then I moved into being the person that would answer the questions. And then I got into networking the computers together. So that was pretty cool. So I had like a Xerox system, I had a PC, and I had a Mac on my desk. So I thought I was the coolest thing in the world because I had three machines on my desk.
And what did you? So when you left there, um, was it a while before you ended up in your first dedicated information security role, or was it always
And
sort
that
of part of
consulting
it?
role, I was a sysadmin basically.
Okay, yeah,
So doing mostly what back then was called local area networking for
yeah,
what became just what's built into systems today. So how do you connect up computers? They were network operating systems like LAN Manager or 3Com 3 Plus Share, crap like that, right? So that was kind of what my jam was as a consultant. I help people connect those together. So I did that for a number of years. It kind of evolved into other things, but kind of stayed there. And right at this time, it's the late 90s, right? So now the internet is entering. And I was still back doing sysadmin stuff. So my next job I took, because I had some of that sysadmin experience, I joined General Electric, and General Electric aircraft engines at the time,
Mm.
while GE as a whole was trying to get on the web to do e-commerce. They're a manufacturer at the time. So it's like they weren't doing typical e-commerce. People weren't buying things for personal use. So
Right. Yeah.
I'm not going to sell an engine online, right?
Yeah.
So they're,
Yeah.
what the heck do we do online? So it was part sales and things like that. So they were hot and heavy in their journey to go to the web to start to do e-commerce. And I hadn't spent any time in that because I was doing all this sysadmin stuff, right? So I had to like quickly jump over and figure out what that world was about very quickly because they were ahead of where I was, and it was a great experience. So I ended up owning their identity solution, which all those systems had to connect into. So that's kind of how I made that move. And I stayed at GE for 19 years.
Oh wow. Okay. And then so making that move, it sounds like it was quite a different job. What do you think that how do you think you got that role? If it what were the was there much that sort of connected the two, or was it like more personality? What was it that you think that got you that move?
I actually skipped one because it was so short. I forgot. From consulting, I worked at a software vendor for a little while. So I was doing technical sales just for
Okay.
18 months. And then I went to GE because I just did that as getting out of consulting.
Yeah.
So all that put together, I had the sysadmin experience. Working for that software vendor, I learned about identity. I was starting to learn about identity solutions, and GE needed someone to take over their identity solution. So they're like, well, the one you know isn't the one we're using, but you can learn it. So that was one. It was applicable skill.
Yeah.
Two, I think I had 15 years under my belt, so I was still fairly young because I had worked so early. My tenure was pretty long, right? Because I
Right.
worked the whole time I was in college, and that counted, right? So I was hired in at that point as a senior engineering kind of person, joining General Electric. That was good, but there's a good and bad side to that story. But at the time, it was very good, right? Because I got in there at a fairly high level, didn't even realize that that's what was happening because you're new to a company. But I was pretty at the top of the engineering side when they hired me. And I think the sales taught me to speak in front of people. I
Yep.
was scared to death to do it before, and that's all you do. So I mean, I had to get over that fear being in that job. I obviously had the technical skills they were looking for. I had some professional maturity. So I think that kind of made me a little bit of a unicorn for them. So I think that's what made me attractive to them to hire. And I had tried to get into a few other companies, and they were looking for much more of a traditional pedigree. Like
Yep.
you went straight from high school to college, you joined all these clubs, you did all these extracurriculars, and then you got your first big, wonderful job. And I had none of that pedigree. And I was so frustrated. I couldn't get into this one company. I'm not going to say who they were. Um, and then GE, interviewed me, and they were like, "We think that's fantastic that you did that. Like you worked full time while you went to school at night, and you did all these different kinds of things. Like you worked in sales, and you did that. We think that's awesome." So I'm like, "All right, I found the place I belong because they
They
appreciated
appreciated
all
it.
that experience and the different skills."
Yeah, how well rounded you were. And well, and look, did it work out for them? They had an employee for 19 years. Yes, it
Right?
did.
Yeah.
I think like I encourage as much as we can impact it, but whenever we're talking to hiring managers, much as what I'm encouraging them is to look for people that, of course, have the minimum of what the essentials, let's say, of what they need to have for a role, but very much are looking for somebody that doesn't have it all, because somebody that has it all is going to be bored pretty quick. You want somebody that's going to feel some growth, has some stretch to the role. And I encourage that as much as possible. Look for that. Look for the passion. Look for that mix of skills that are outside the typical. The consulting. You've had to be put in front of different clients. Go and travel and represent this client. Go and see this client. The sales, like being able to communicate to all sorts of different people and not be worried about having a conversation with a complete stranger about something is a real strength. And we'll talk about attributes to become a CISO, but all of those things
Right.
what's building your foundation to push your career on. So I love that. So 19 years at GE. Are you going to tell me the bad as well, by the way? I've got to
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
Come on then.
Well, I would say because I entered in kind of at the top of that realm. So I was I would say there was probably one more rung of the chain before they forced you into leadership that I could have gotten into that eventually developed over time that was there. But I was kind of at the top of the engineer role, whatever, right? So, if I wasn't ready to be a people leader, I was going to hang out at that level for quite some time, which is exactly what happened. I hung out at that level for quite some time. But here's the thing, it's really interesting. I remember taking that job. It was very high stress, like crazy time in their evolution. A lot of stuff was going on. It was a very high pressure environment, very high expectations. And I will tell you, I tried to quit, I don't know how many times. And I say tried to quit because I told myself I have got to get out of here and do something else, right? And then they would suck me back in, right? That just when I was ready to give up, like they weren't going to give me something else interesting, or I was tired of what I was doing, somebody would knock on the door and say, come do this instead, right? And it would be moving me a little, even though I didn't change the exact position band I was in.
Yeah.
It'd give me a little bit more money, a little more responsibility, change up what I was doing. I'm like, okay, let's see how this goes. And then I would be like, all right, well, if that doesn't go. So, I mean, so much so I didn't even invest this. You young people, don't do this. I didn't invest in the 401k program for the first 2 years because I'm like, I'm not going to be here long enough. That's what I said. And after 2 years, I started getting some help from a financial person, and they're like, you need to be investing in that 401k. So I finally did it. But that's how much I didn't believe I was going to stay there.
Right.
But I would say to their goodness, right? They very much were paying attention to people doing well and tapping them for the next thing. They were very good at that. So they just kept tapping me and I just kept staying.
Yeah, it sounds like
So
they knew that exact point of when somebody's kind of getting tired of it, but they're not quite tired enough yet. So maybe getting the most out of them and then having the right time to come and say, right, let's do this next. It's interesting what you're talking about there. We usually talk about this a bit later, but I think it's a great example of some people at the moment are very upset. We call this the Route to CISO podcast, which is, I think it's quite amusing because it may attract people that are just looking to become a CISO, right? What's the route to do that? How do I do that? And in fact, what's
I
come out
never
of
wanted to be a CISO.
yeah, there we go. And you're not the first person to say that on here.
Right?
And I think like the interesting thing is that I think some of the people that will be on here, obviously some may become CISOs, many won't. Many won't because they don't want to when they find out more about it. Maybe it's not the right thing for them. But also some people are just obsessed with getting the next title, the next job, and that making sure they're each of their jobs go like this. And if there's one thing I've seen and heard on here, it just doesn't happen that way, right? I don't know anybody that's had a clear one like this. And the people that tend to get obsessed with doing this are the ones that often aren't building the breadth of other experience you need to. And so I think steps backwards and steps sidewards are really important.
Yeah, definitely sometimes backwards.
Right. Have you had that experience? Have you?
Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
Tell me a bit about it, please.
So I was hired as a technician owning something. That's my first foray into information security because they began creating information security teams and the identity stuff they decided belonged in there, which pretty true. It's where we have it today. So I was on the security team because I owned the identity solution. So that's how I got into security. At a certain point, I got to a place where I was, helping with strategy and doing a little more than just hands on the keyboard. And an opportunity came up to be the acting. For a minute, I was the acting information security leader for a minute there because their information security leader left. I'd say that was probably 5, 6, 7 years into being there, somewhere around that time. So I did it because they needed someone to just be the acting person. And I didn't just fill the hole. I tried to be that acting person for them while I did it. And I realized the big thing, I'm not ready for this. It was great. Oh, we even had a big thing happen while I was in that job. We had a big outage happen from a virus, right? So I got baptism by fire. But I realized it wasn't just the decision making and maturity. It's just engaging people and knowing how to be a good leader. And I'm like, I did okay, but I don't know that I'm ready. So I'm not going to try to pursue going back to being a people leader. They actually hired a really experienced person to come in. And I knew that was going to happen. I knew it.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting to keep it. But I didn't go pursue something else at the time. I'm like, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing for a while. I'm not quite ready for that. So I took on roles with greater responsibility, but not necessarily people. Um, and I was basically like a senior architect. So infrastructure architecture at the time. That still means something today, even in
Yeah.
cloud, right? Infrastructure architecture. And I became a senior infrastructure architecture person. That morphed into the first groupings of what we called a solution architecture team. So they built out a solution architecture team or a set of them. And I got to be one of those leaders because I was a senior architect. And I was doing more than just the technical. I was bridging gaps and helping people understand things and working with some of the upper leaders. So it wasn't just, oh, she's the most senior technical person. I was starting to do some of the things that a leader would do versus just the technician. So that was my first, I got pushed a little bit to consider taking a manager job. It was like 6 people. And I wasn't so sure
Was that the
when to
first
do
time
it.
you managed people? Was that the first time
I
you
got
managed
asked to
officially
manage
after, other than the
people.
acting?
That was the
Yeah.
first real time I got asked to do it in the government when I was about to leave. And I'm like, absolutely not. I know I'm not ready. I don't want to do that yet. I still want to do technology. So then I left. And then I got the acting role in GE for that period of time and then didn't pursue. And then did this senior architect thing. And then they finally were like, why don't you consider this? And I'm probably at that point, I don't know, in my 30s. I'm not upper 30s, but still 30s, somewhere in there. So I'm like, why not? Like, what's the advantage? What's the pros and cons? I will help drive more strategy that I'm kind of already doing. I'll get the chance to help other people's careers. That's kind of cool. So I agreed to do it. And I think I did really well in that first job with 6 people, right? Because it played totally into what I was already doing. So it was kind of a low risk entry point. It's kind of what I already knew. Now I have to add people leadership to it instead of just everything. So I was always a very risk averse person. I didn't want to go take something on completely different than what I was doing. Just me. Some people can do that. I just wasn't cool with that. I needed it to be incremental. That worked out great. But the next jump I got asked or suggested to pursue, they didn't tell me to do it. Wasn't given the job. I had to apply, but people urged me to take it. Was a big operations job, which had, I don't know, 20 plus people worldwide, probably hundreds of contractors worldwide and multiple different technologies. So it was like platform operations of different platforms. And I did it and I went into it with some readiness for the size of it and thinking about how to approach things, but it definitely broke me. There were things that I was not managing as well as I could. Um, I wouldn't say I was trying to do everybody's job because I couldn't. So that was one good thing I didn't do. But it was just a lot to deal with your peers, how to manage up. Um, it was a high stress spot because it was operations. So there was a lot of, let's say, a lot of lessons learned that came out of that job, and that job wore me out, right? Because you're 24/7, you're on calls when stuff goes down, and it was just a lot. So coming out of that role, I stepped back and ended up. This is where I met Larry, by the way. So this is a very touchy story. I stepped back and said, I need a break from this. Not that I don't think I can't be a leader again, but I just need to rethink where I am and what I want to do. And a job opened up on the security team to do what we called an anti-APT solution. So it's like, how do we think about segregating our unstructured data in a way that would make it harder for a threat actor to get to that unstructured data? And this is the beginning of what most people were like, what the heck is APT, right? Advanced persistent threats, right? I didn't even know what that meant then, right? Because I had been the identity person. I wasn't doing threat anything, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, sounds cool. I don't know anything about that. And now I'm getting a little more confidence, right? And I knew I wouldn't have to manage people. They're like, you're going to be the project manager for this, and you're going to have great experts around you that you can tap into. So do you want to do it? Yes. And I just cherish the thought of not having to deal with people's evaluations or any of those things. You have to think about just indirect influence again. So I did that for almost 2 years. The project, I would say, was successful for a while. I did find out about 4 years later it had outlived its life, and that's okay because you should change things if they don't work anymore.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience. I learned a ton about threat management, how threats work, what the APT is, how lateral movement works. I didn't know any of these things, right? Like I'd feed our lead, a security guy. I'm like, hey, if I take you out for lunch, will you explain to me how lateral movement works? If I fed him, he would tell me anything.
Well,
So I learned a ton from that, and I
yeah.
got my strength back to say I think I'm ready to go back into leadership. And weirdly, I went back to a solution architecture job again, which was something I did two jobs before. It
Yeah.
was a little different. Time had changed, the organization had changed, so it was going to be different. And definitely with all the things I learned, I approached that job so much differently than I had other ones. And it was probably, I don't know, 9 people in that job. So a little bit bigger than the first one, but definitely smaller than the second one that wore me out. And I flourished after that. I did much better. I learned a lot of lessons from the hard knocks I got on the really big one that just drowned me. And then, from there, I just kept doing different things. I took a business facing job. I had never been business facing. So I was in the sales IT team and did sales and marketing support. And software development. I was not a software engineer, but I had to lead a bunch of software engineers. Great experience. And then I ended up going back to a huge platform operations job. So now here I am. I'm going to do that again. I remember people telling me, yeah, it worked out so good for you last time. Don't do that again. But I still did it. It was my first foray into now I'm ready. Now I'm jumping into an early executive level at this point.
Yeah. What was your title at that point?
It was ERP and enabling tools operations for all of GE, the whole company. So I'm at the corporate level now.
Right.
Great lessons learned there, a lot of resiliency. That was really I call that the beginning of the end of the GE as we know it today. There was a lot going on in the company at that time, a lot of change, a lot of consternation about where GE was going to land. So that was definitely, from a resilience perspective, another test of my fortitude and emotional intelligence, I would call it. But I fared well. And then I was ready to exit. I was like, all right, it's time to go. I'm going to exit GE. It's time. And some leaders that I had worked with in the past found out I was going to leave. And one of them, who I'm still friends with today, who is a CISO of United Airlines, came to me and she said, hey, I'm going to be the CISO back at aviation again. You should come work for me. I have some jobs open. I'm like, well, like what? She's like, the threat operations leader. I'm like, I've never done threat operations. And she said to me, ops, sense of urgency, how the threat works, right? Even though you haven't been a threat analyst, the state of the threat, right? How to collaborate, how to bring diverse teams together, how to work globally. She's like, they don't need you to teach them how to be threat analysts. They already are threat analysts. They need you to get them resources, help them collaborate, help raise the bar on their processes. She's like, that's what they need you for. You can do it. So I'm like, all right. So I applied for the job, interviewed, and she hired me. So I ended up staying another 2 years at GE in a threat operations role. So now I'm really in the thick of what I would consider cybersecurity.
So they pulled you back again. You thought you were going, and they pulled you back for another couple of years. And so I didn't know. So Deneen, you're speaking about?
I am. Yes.
Yeah. I'm trying to get her on here. We've already talked about it. Trying to track down and get the times. We're going to make it happen.
It's really cool too. Like she's got some very different, interesting turns and twists in hers. She was not cyber her entire career either.
Right. Yeah. We've had a bit of a chat about it. So watch this space. Yeah. That's what I'll say.
Yeah. But she's the one who pulled me in because she was mentoring me, and I was trying to get a cyber job outside the company, but my pedigree was not so good because this in and out of cyber, right? I definitely was not trying to be a CISO, but I'm like, I could do vulnerability management. I could do identity again. I could do these other things. And people weren't looking at me in the executive ranks, even executive recruiters, because they're like, you just don't look as strong on paper. And I was like, dang it. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to take an infrastructure job, I guess, and try to work my way over to security, because I knew there was going to be a huge future in that space to stay there. And I was really passionate about getting people into the field. So I knew that's where I wanted to go. So I'm like, well, I'm going to have to leave to do it. And then Deneen was mentoring me. And she's like, you didn't tell me you actually wanted to be in that kind of role. Hold on. Don't leave yet. I'll come back to you.
I've got something up my sleeve.
Tell me all this was going to happen, right? And when she moved, she's like, now here's what I got open. Here's the one I think you'd be good at. You should apply for. And, and that's an important thing too, to have people that believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, I did not have this checkbox of everything perfect. No CISSP. I don't have a CISSP, people, right? I am GIOC certified, but I did not have CISSP, right? And I got GX certified because Deneen made me get GX certified. But I didn't have that perfect pedigree, but she knew what I was capable of because she observed me, right? She's like, you're going to be able to do this. Great, right? And I did it. And then I did that for 2 years. And just then it finally came time to do something else. COVID happened. The world shut down. My colleague that I had worked for in that job where I did the anti-APT work, Brian Minnick, another great CISO who's now a CISO/tech leader. That's my boss. He was over here, he had just came over here and was, starting up a new team and adjusting what was going on here. And I just started knocking on his door, and he didn't have anything at the time. So I went to, that's when Deneen's like, you're staying, you're going to work over here. She had left to go to United. Right. She had by that time left to go to United. So I started knocking on Brian's door again. And lo and behold, some things came up, and it just so happened the same type of job, the threat ops leader. And I was glad because I wasn't done doing that job. I loved it. And to this day, it's still been one of my favorite jobs.
Just needed that change out of the business. Well, look, I'm going to stop you there because we'll jump into the where you are currently and what's happened since you joined there, I think, in part 2. I also want to talk, you talked about Deneen being a mentor as well. And I'd love to talk to you about that. And so I think that will probably be a good thing to speak on a part 2 as well. So I think if we cut part 1 here, I'm going to say thanks for everybody for joining us. We're going to end up carry on chatting, and then we'll start part 2. But you guys won't get part 2 for another week. So you'll have to be patient. Yes, but we got lots more to talk about. So make sure you come back. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us on the Route to CISO podcast, and catch you next week with part 2 with Laurie. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile, and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.